England, before the Normans, was a brutal, mystical place where kings were made and unmade through violence, treachery, and sheer audacity. For nearly 6 centuries, from the 500s to 1066, Anglo-Saxon rulers fought Vikings, murdered relatives, converted pagans, and forged a nation through blood and iron. These weren't the sanitized monarchs of later centuries. These were warriors, zealots, and survivors whose lives read like epic sagas filled with betrayal, redemption, and jaw-dropping insanity. Today, advanced AI technology allows us to transform medieval manuscripts and chronicles into vivid recreations, bringing these legendary figures back to life. Join me as we uncover the most insane story from every Anglo-Saxon king's reign. From mysterious warlords emerging from the Dark Ages to the last Saxon king who died with an arrow through his eye at Hastings. Let's start with a mystery that haunts historians. Cerdic, founder of Wessex and ancestor of every subsequent West Saxon king, has a British name, not a Saxon one. Think about that. The man who supposedly led Saxon invaders against the native Britons was possibly British himself, or at least half-British. The chronicles claim he landed on the south coast with his son Cynric in 495 and spent decades fighting the Britons, eventually carving out the kingdom that would unite England. But here's where it gets crazy. Some historians believe Cerdic was actually a British warlord who switched sides, allying with Saxon mercenaries to seize power. Imagine the betrayal. A Romano-British noble, speaking Latin and worshipping Christian gods, turning his back on his people, adopting Saxon ways, and founding a dynasty that would rule for 5 centuries. If true, English history begins not with foreign invasion, but with insider treachery on an epic scale. We'll never know for certain. The sources are too fragmentary, too contaminated with legend. But the fact that England's royal line might descend from a British turncoat is deliciously ironic. Ethelbert of Kent, 589 to 616. The pagan who gambled on Christianity. Picture this. You're a powerful pagan king in 597, comfortable with your gods, your customs, your world. Then a monk from Rome named Augustine shows up on your shore with barely 40 companions, claiming to carry the true faith. Ethelbert could have killed them all. Many Anglo-Saxon kings would have. Instead, he did something extraordinary and insane. He listened. Not just listened, but converted, becoming the first Christian Anglo-Saxon king. Why? His Frankish wife Bertha was already Christian, and perhaps she influenced him. But converting meant abandoning the gods his ancestors had worshipped for centuries, the gods that had supposedly brought his kingdom victory and prosperity. It meant reimagining the cosmos, accepting that everything his culture believed about the afterlife was wrong. The political calculation was brilliant, but risky. Christianity connected him to the sophisticated kingdoms of continental Europe, to Rome itself, to literacy and learning. But it could have sparked rebellion from traditionalists who saw this as betrayal. Ethelbert's gamble paid off. Christianity spread, and his laws became the first written English legal code. But imagine the courage or madness required to overturn your entire worldview based on the words of foreign missionaries. Edwin of Northumbria, 616 to 632. The king who held a pagan-Christian debate. Edwin inherited Northumbria through decades of exile and warfare, finally seizing power in 616. His wife, like Ethelbert's, was Christian, and missionaries pressured him to convert. Here's where Edwin shows either profound wisdom or staggering indecision. He called a council, a public debate between his pagan priests and Christian missionaries, to decide which religion was better. This is insane on multiple levels. Imagine the pagan priests, knowing their jobs and possibly lives depend on winning this argument, facing off against trained theologians from Rome. According to Bede, the chief pagan priest Coifi was so convinced by Christian arguments that he personally desecrated his own temple, throwing spears at it and setting it ablaze, declaring the old gods worthless. Whether this happened exactly as described or is Christian propaganda, the symbolism is staggering. The guardian of ancient traditions destroying what he'd spent his life defending. Edwin converted, and Northumbria became a Christian powerhouse. But 6 years later, Penda of Mercia, a fierce pagan, killed Edwin in battle at Hatfield Chase, and Northumbria descended into chaos. Edwin's severed head became a relic, and his dramatic conversion became a template for future kings. Alfred the Great, 871–899, the king who burned the cakes. Everyone knows Alfred saved England from the Vikings, but the craziest period of his life is less famous. In 878, the great heathen army under Guthrum launched a surprise winter attack, overrunning Wessex so completely that Alfred fled into the Somerset marshes with a handful of followers. The King of Wessex, the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom, was reduced to a fugitive hiding in swamps. Legend says he took shelter in a peasant woman's cottage, and she, not recognizing him, left him to watch some cakes baking. Alfred, lost in thought about his kingdom's collapse, let the cakes burn. The woman returned and berated him furiously, scolding the King of England for incompetence. Whether this happened or not, it captures Alfred's lowest moment, so thoroughly defeated he couldn't even handle basic tasks. But here's where Alfred proves his genius. From this desperate position, he organized resistance, built a guerrilla army, studied Viking tactics, and launched a surprise counterattack that caught Guthrum's forces off guard. At the Battle of Edington, Alfred won decisively, besieged the Vikings until they surrendered, then offered peace on one condition. Guthrum must convert to Christianity with Alfred as his godfather. The Viking warlord who'd nearly destroyed Wessex became Alfred's godson. That's either brilliant diplomacy or absolute psychological warfare. Alfred went on to reorganize Wessex's military, build a navy, fortify towns, codify laws, promote literacy, and earn the Great title in English history. From cake-burning refugee to national savior is one hell of a redemption arc. Aethelstan, 924–939, the king who united England. Aethelstan's craziest moment came at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937, the most important battle you've probably never heard of. After becoming the first king to truly rule all England, Aethelstan faced a massive coalition: Vikings from Dublin, the King of Scotland, and the King of Strathclyde, all allied to destroy him and partition England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls Brunanburh the greatest battle fought in Britain since the Anglo-Saxons arrived. The fighting was apocalyptic, lasting all day, with thousands dead on both sides. 5 kings and 7 earls died. The battlefield was so soaked with blood that chroniclers wrote poetry about ravens feasting on corpses and wolves howling over the slain. Aethelstan's army held barely, and the victory secured England's survival as a unified kingdom. But here's the personal tragedy. Aethelstan never married, never had legitimate children. Some historians speculate he was gay, others that he'd taken religious vows. Whatever the reason, he died in 939, just 45 years old, without an heir of his body, his kingdom passing to his brother. The man who created England left no direct descendants, as if he gave everything to the nation and nothing to himself. Edmund I, 939–946, murdered at his own feast. Edmund became king at 18 when his brother Aethelstan died. He spent his short reign fighting Viking incursions and rebellions, but his death is the crazy part. In 946, Edmund was celebrating St. Augustine's Day with a feast at Puckle Church in Gloucestershire. During the celebrations, he recognized an exiled criminal named Leofa in the crowd. Accounts differ on what happened next, but Edmund either tried to arrest Leofa himself or simply lost his temper. A struggle ensued, and Leofa stabbed the king to death, right there in the hall, surrounded by his bodyguards and nobles. Edmund was 25 years old. Think about the insanity. The king of all England, victor of multiple wars, killed in his own hall during a religious feast by a lone criminal. Where were the guards? Why did Edmund engage personally? The murder shocked the kingdom. Leofa was immediately killed, torn apart by Edmund's men. But the damage was done. Edmund's sons were infants, too young to rule, so his brother Edred became king. Edmund's body was buried at Glastonbury Abbey, and he was venerated as a saint despite dying in what was essentially a drunken brawl. Edgar the Peaceful, 959 to 975, the king whose coronation came late. Edgar earned his epithet the Peaceful because his reign saw no major wars, but don't let that fool you. His personal life was scandalous. He allegedly abducted a nun from Wilton Abbey to marry her, supposedly murdered her first husband, and definitely juggled multiple wives or concubines, fathering children with several women. The church was horrified but powerless. Here's the craziest thing: Edgar wasn't crowned until 973, 14 years into his reign, when he was nearly 30. Why the delay? Some historians think the church withheld coronation because of his sexual misconduct, finally relenting when he did sufficient penance. His coronation at Bath was deliberately magnificent, a ritual designed to emphasize the king's sacred character, possibly to overwrite memories of his scandals. Edgar allegedly had 8 kings row him along the River Dee in Chester, symbolizing his supremacy over Britain. Whether this happened or was propaganda, it shows Edgar's genius for theater. He died just 2 years later at 32, possibly from stroke or heart attack, and his death triggered immediate succession crisis between his sons from different mothers, destabilizing the kingdom he'd worked so hard to keep peaceful. The legacy. These weren't the peaceful, civilized monarchs of later centuries. These were survivors, warriors, zealots, and sometimes madmen who forged England through violence, faith, and impossible choices. They fought pagans and Christians, Vikings and each other, demons both external and internal. Some were saints, some were monsters, most were both. Their crazy stories shaped England's DNA, creating institutions, laws, and legends that echo into the present. When the Normans conquered in 1066, they didn't erase Anglo-Saxon England. They built on its foundations, absorbed its culture, and inherited its complexity. Understanding these kings, their triumphs and failures, their sanity and madness, gives us insight into how nations are really built. Not through grand plans, but through individual choices, some brilliant, some insane, all consequential. If you enjoyed these wild tales from Anglo-Saxon England, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss where we're going next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the past.